Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It is Tuesday, October 12th, 2010. At least it's that day in California. We're sure glad that you've joined us. Our guest tonight is Sylvia Martinez. Hi, Sylvia.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm great. I really appreciate you coming on. You know you have a fan club, right?
Okay.
It was really fun to watch the tweets today about your event tonight. I'm going to quote from one. Thought-provoking and not the status quo.
Wow. I need to make like a movie poster. With all the good quotes.
Anyway, I'm in that fan club, and it's sure good to have you here. The Future of Education is sponsored by my employer, Elluminate, now Blackboard Collaborate. The project I work on is called Learn Central. It's a social network for educators with Elluminate baked in. It is all free. We hope you'll come and use it and take advantage of the capabilities there. We're also sponsored this month by the Redo program from Bing and Microsoft. They're kind enough to help my book budget, and they're sponsors for the month of October, so we're appreciative of that. Coming up in November, we do have our Global Education Conference. If you've submitted a presentation you haven't heard back, I am the bottleneck. Although I'm not vetting all those presentations, they are going through the regional chair people. So, but a lot of them have gotten back to me, and it's my task tomorrow to start getting those letters out. But it's a highly inclusive program. We really want as many people as possible to have an opportunity to present. It is free over 5 days. It should just be a blast. So please go to globaleducationconference.com. Coming up on the Future of Education tomorrow, Roger Schenk talks to us. And then on Thursday, our good friend Kathleen Cushman has a student panel on homework. This promises to be really delightful. Next week, Nancy White on Networks and Communities, Jennifer Fox on Your Child's Strengths. The week after that, Jim Burke. Then Diane Ravitch is coming on. You can look at the rest of the schedule there. New on that list are Will Richardson, Deborah Meyer, and Alfie Cohn. So very much fun. The student panel is Thursday, 2 nights from now, at the same time. And I don't know if anybody knows much about Kathleen, but she's just delightful, and her message on homework I think will resonate with a lot of people. I'm just going to have students talk about that, and everything she does involves students, as we're also going to hear from Sylvia tonight. If you've missed the futureofeducation.com session, we have them all recorded. Last week I talked to Joe DiMartino and Denise Walk on their book, The Personalized High School. I have to tell you, I drank the Kool-Aid. I really like this book. I really like the work they've done. We're going to do a series of shows on some of the activities that are around these personalized schools, including advisories, personal learning plans, and exhibitions. If those words don't mean anything to you, I apologize, but it's really fascinating work on building a culture of education within schools. We also had our 3-hour Elevate the Dialogue panel. That was a lot of fun, not without controversy. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight, but anyway, it's really a good session, and hopefully a chance that we're going to start a series with Edutopia and Microsoft to continue trying to elevate the dialogue on education. And Sylvia and I, I'm sure we're going to dive into that a little tonight. So if this is your first time in Elluminate, welcome. This is a participative environment, and we hope that you'll participate by putting things in the chat. You can also use the small emoticons that are at the bottom of the participant window. They say a smiling face, a clapping hand, a confused look, or a thumbs down. Next to them is a larger button with a hand and a green up arrow. That's to raise your hand and let us know you want to ask a question. Please do, before you raise your hand, go up to Tools Audio and run the Audio Setup Wizard to make sure your microphone is working. You can also place questions just in the chat. I find it's much easier to follow the chat if I go up to View Layouts and I select the wide layout. So that's View Layouts and select the wide layout to view the chat a little bit easier. Now we're going to give you a chance to let us know where you're participating from. Look for the wand with the red star at the end to the left of the map. Click on that and then click on the map. And you can also do a shout out in the chat, letting us know where you're listening from and maybe the time and the temperature. Looks like Brazil. Oi, Brazil. Looks like India, Australia. Your fan club is geographically diverse. Exotic Northern Virginia, Canada. Anyway, wherever you are listening from, or if you're listening to the recording, we sure appreciate your participating. Oh, China. What did I say? India. I didn't mean India. I meant China. There's China. Sylvia, so thanks so much for coming on tonight. Really fun. I feel like I'm talking to an old friend.
Well, thanks. That's nice. I feel the same way.
A friend who I've been friends with for a while, not an old friend.
Right. Now that we're this age, we have to make that clear.
So I know we talked about several topics that we could touch on tonight. I wondered if we might start by having you just give a little bit of background about yourself again and helping people to understand where you've come from and what you do at Generation Yes.
Okay. I'm president of Generation Yes, and this is an organization that works with schools, mostly in the United States, but in other countries as well. And we have a number of programs, curriculum and online tools that help schools look at students in a new way. Some of the things that we do is we have curriculum for students doing tech support. We have online tools that help students work with teachers, so students teaching teachers about technology. It's a combination of technology learning and service learning that really helps put students at the center of the learning experience with technology. That results in a lot of benefits. Kids are the digital generation, the teachers need the help. It's a great thing that schools can do that really walks the talk of student empowerment and really, put students in the driver's seat with something that they feel very passionate about and that teachers really need help with. So it's also something that schools do naturally. I mean, everybody says, oh, sure, I have kids help out. But when you think about it in a more systemic way, it really can provide additional benefits. And yes, Andy, the IT departments need the help too. Sometimes there's a divide between what the IT departments want, have an idea about doing and what the teachers have an idea about doing. And students can help bridge that in a lot of schools. So we work with schools, a lot of districts, even some state departments, to bring these ideas to real schools, real teachers, and hopefully make more opportunities available for students.
So do you find that there is sort of extended influence from these programs toward having students participate in other ways, or does it end up being kind of isolated to tech?
Well, every school is very different. There are some schools that focus completely on having students do tech support. Those, I wouldn't, it happens a lot. The longer schools do this, the more they see students contributing, the more you can identify students as real resources. You can, we do have students, serving on tech committees, contributing to plans. I was talking to a tech director today who said that he's been trying to get an adult, a committee of adults who are working on their new tech plan for like 6 months, and to get it on Google Docs so that everyone could edit it. He finally just gave it to a group of his Gen Yes kids, and they had it on Google Docs in an afternoon. He didn't have to teach the kids the Google Docs. He didn't have to do anything. And, that's just one step. So kids, if they're given responsibility and they're helped to step up and take responsibility, could really be great, really help out a lot. We have other schools that focus solely on students helping teachers. They're not fixing broken stuff. They're just working one-on-one with teachers on projects. We have other schools doing community service, helping nonprofits, teaching seniors how to get email. Kids are an amazing resource. They love to be asked to help, and it's great for everybody.
So for you personally, what have been kind of the lessons about student involvement in their education? Are there broader lessons here?
Oh, I think, first of all, this is like my third career. Fourth if you count, being a mom and a parent and the head career. I started out as an electrical engineer working in aerospace. And then I jumped to working with educational software. I worked for Davidson. I'm sure some of you remember Math Blaster. It's still out there. People love Math Blaster. I worked there for about 7 years. I was an executive producer, got involved with game design. I moved on to other companies where we did actual video game and console design. Those kinds of experiences are intense learning experiences in themselves. Schools try and teach students how to be in the real world, but the learning experiences that you have as an engineer, as a game designer, aren't very much like school. So when I came to Generation Yes, part of that was sort of in me, this sort of conflict between the way school is and the way real life is. And Generation Yes, I feel, is the way that I'm trying to bring those two things together, to help make school more collaborative, more like real life, to help people see technology not as a way to do stuff to kids, but as a way to open up all kinds of opportunities to kids. Some of the most amazing mathematicians I've ever met were programmers in the game industry, and many of them had either left school or been told they were bad at math, or they just didn't see things the way that the math class saw them. And so what I try and do with Generation Yes is help schools find ways to really include students, to do the things that the students find interesting and the students find really engaging, and tie that to academic purposes and tie that to the wisdom of adults. It's not like these kids are just so smart and they're running wild, but that together adults and kids can really form powerful teams and produce amazing things.
Are there any common elements to the schools where you feel like they're being really successful in creating that kind of an engaged learning environment that you can describe? I mean, do you see similarities? Is it a philosophical mandate or strongly held position? Is it a certain kind of a culture of learning? What helps schools to get to that place?
It's definitely philosophical. I think things that fit with this are project-based learning, student-centered, student ownership. We have a lot of one-to-one schools working with us because, one-to-one is kind of the concrete embodiment of putting power into student hands. So, schools that are willing to try new things, it's tough. One of the things we were going to talk about today is the myths of technology integration. And there's a lot of status quo in how you do professional development. So schools that are willing to question their own practices and say, are we doing, or is what we're doing really working? Do we know it's working? Can we show it's working? And even if it's working, what could we do that's better? So I think this constant challenging yourself is a philosophy, and being open to learning yourself as an institution, as an individual. I think all of the schools we work with have that sort of, how can we do it better tomorrow? What can be better tomorrow than what we did today?
I think Sandy puts in a question there, are there common elements where you've seen this fail? What if we sort of springboard on that and say, are there larger policy lessons that you might draw from where you've seen success that would help us to maybe elevate that reform discussion a little? The reform discussion is being held at so many different levels. When I go to a school and I work with a school and there are things that I see in that school that are problematic, sometimes that doesn't always inform like a national level education reform discussion.
I think one of the problems is everyone's bringing this sort of very personal, perspective, and since everyone's been to school, everyone has a personal perspective, to this national education reform discussion. What I know is with some schools, I see a lot of churning. I see not just, funding churning, but reorganization. I can't tell you the number of times I talked to someone and they will, we're really on this, but first we're going to reorganize, and then we're going to write a plan. And it's like, okay, call me in 5 years. The kids are growing up. The kids are out of there in a year. Classroom, school funding is also a problem. If you want to change a program that has a student component, you have to start a year in advance. So the budget has to be there like now. If the budget's not there now, the student programming isn't going to be scheduled in time for, January, February, March scheduling, and then it won't happen next September. So it's hard to focus on something that's so far away that you don't know if you're going to have the budget for. So this kind of constant churning and the funding getting pulled from this and that, that's what I see on a very ground level as being, a problem. Another thing is personnel changeover. There's a real attitude when you get a new superintendent or a new principal. You often hear, well, out with the old, I'm bringing in my stuff. And, everyone just kind of shrugs and says, oh, well. That's a real problem. Another issue is that, funding just gets jerked around. You can't count on the budget for something next year. So you can't count on the budget, you can't plan for it. If you can't plan for it, it doesn't happen.
So I want to separate some of the thoughts I've been having and be sure I'm not putting words into your mouth, but I'm wondering if there's a connection here. If you see certain characteristics of schools that are open to this kind of participation by the students, and it is cultural, does that in some ways tell us that this really isn't about national reform, but it's more about helping to create that culture locally?
Well, to me, that's one of the biggest issues that we're talking about, this idea that you can top down tell schools what to do, and yet, schools are the most, local, community-driven thing there is. Every kid is different. Every classroom is different. Every teacher is different. And having these top-down mandates come down is just another part of the churning. It's just like the superintendent's boss leaves, and the superintendent's boss's boss is changing, and all the rules keep changing. And down at the bottom of the classroom level, you just watch all this stuff go by, and there's no ability to really keep things moving forward. I think that's one of the biggest contradictions about the current conversation about reform. The things they talk about reforming remove professionalism and remove autonomy for the classroom, and that's exactly what needs to be added back to the classroom. For teachers to be professionals, they have to be autonomous. For students to be independent learners, they have to be autonomous. You can't have autonomous students without having autonomous teachers. It just doesn't work. And this contradiction, I don't know how we're going to solve it. I really don't.
So those who've been listening to the interview series are going to be tired of hearing me say this, but I've been kind of intrigued by the model of the total quality management movement, Sylvia, because it basically said you have to give the resources to the person closest to the problem. You have to teach them how to look for the actual causes of issues, and then you empower them to solve them. And I've been saying that for a couple of months now, that I'm intrigued by this connection. And this week, one of my great life heroes is a man named W. Edwards Deming, who helped pull Japan out of post-World War II circumstances to build a great manufacturing base. And somehow I came across a quote this week from him where he talks very specifically about just how counterproductive it is to blame the worker for the faults of the output. And I thought, well, this is so interesting because we really are right now at a point where we are blaming the teachers. And it's very easy to do so, I think. But again, I think it misses the point of the schools that appear to be very successful at really helping a broad range of students tend to have built a culture rather than having criticized individual teachers.
I think part of this is a problem with schools looking for solutions. And it's not just schools. I shouldn't say just schools. We all look for silver bullets. We always look for magic wands. We hope that there's something out there that's just going to work overnight. And I think a lot of times we give power away to, to districts, to vendors who say, okay, autonomy works. We're going to give you an autonomy system. And it's like, great, and so people run off and buy these things that are just completely contradictory. You can't have people solving your problems for you. One of my heroes, you talk about Deming, is a guy who did a lot of work in assessment for workers. He said that assessment is Tom DeMarco. I almost forgot his name. Tom DeMarco said that assessment is worthless if it doesn't help first and foremost the person who's being assessed. And think about that in terms of all this standardized testing stuff. What does it do for a student? If we can't answer that basic question, we're not doing anybody any good. So, I think there's people, I know educators hate hearing how business has all solutions, but I think there are people in business like Deming and DeMarco who have really, really good solutions that could be applied to schools in some in some fashion, because everything certainly doesn't apply.
Well, and certainly I think there's a difference between trying to import business methodologies into schools versus saying there are some people who had real insight into human nature and how things get done, and there may not be a direct transfer, but we can learn from that.
Right. And as a institutions are different than businesses too. Businesses have completely different rules and goals and things they value than institutions do. The school was set up for the benefit of the community, not to make a profit, not to be efficient, but to benefit the community, and for the kids inside, for our civilization to move forward. We can't forget that. That's the most important thing we should be thinking of, not trying to make things more efficient. I think some of this is a little bit of self-doubt among educators that we really can fix these problems ourselves. And believe me, it's not easy. It's not easy to sit down and look at a child and look at the work they're doing. It takes time. It's much easier to have them bubble in a Scantron and slip it through machines, but it's worthless. So which is the bigger waste of time? The thing that takes more time and works, or the thing that is easy to do and doesn't work? But there's a lot of easy and doesn't work solutions out there.
So someone asked if you would share the START program and the student leadership programs that are working, and maybe if you want to talk just about success stories in general, that would be a valuable thing. Yeah, and I think pulling it back to the sort of what are the myths of technology integration. One of the things we hear all the time about why technology isn't really being used as good as it could be in schools is that there's not enough PD. And I think going back to what I said before about questioning these assumptions, if something's not working, doing more of it won't do you any good at all. So I think schools that who are successful really do question whether what they're doing works or not. And one of the myths about PD is that it has to happen outside of the classroom. Whereas I think if you look at any of the research about like professional development or community of practice, if any kind of training or work that you do on your own practice, the closer it is to the place of actual practice, the more beneficial it is. And I think people don't think of the classroom as a community enough. The teacher is almost always there with the students by themselves, where they're the only adult and the only professional in the room.
looking at that classroom as a community of practice can give you some real insight about what kids can do as, participants in this community of practice. What can they contribute to the learning environment? What are we asking them to do? How do we ask them to step up instead of one person being the source of all knowledge and the kids being, the receptacles? How can we turn that arrow around and go both ways? So part of what we do in schools is ask them to look at professional development not just as something that happens outside of the classroom when the teachers go away. I think there are some unintentional messages that happen with PD outside of the classroom. And, completely unintentional. But the message is often that, well, teachers, come out here and you can learn this tool and you won't have to be afraid of making any mistakes in front of those students. Well, there's a lot of messages there, that making mistakes is bad, that risking in front of students is bad, that showing students your process is bad, that you have to be some amazing magic teacher before you can even set foot in the classroom and share these tools with kids. I think a lot of teachers find that hidden message fairly convincing, that if they don't figure it all out ahead of time, they shouldn't really bring the tool into the classroom. And I think that misses a huge opportunity. And that's what we work on with these student leaders in the school. What can teachers share about the process of bringing technology into the school? And it's not only the schools I work with. I hear from schools all over the world. People send me blogs and send me videos and send me posts about, kids just being fabulous at figuring this stuff out and teaching others. Well, I'm not saying teachers don't have to learn it, but why are we waiting? Are we going to let all this time go by trying to convince the teachers that they should learn technology and then hope that they turn around and teach it to students? I just don't think we can count on that pipeline anymore. When you look at it just in numbers, teachers and staff are about 8% of the population on any campus. Students are about 92%. So just in terms of numbers, we really got to think of this as a 100% solution. What can we do 100% that makes technology integration happen at the school?
So there's so much chat I can't follow it all and listen to everything you say at the same time. So if you said something in the chat that needs a response, I know. I apologize. Please post it again, and we'll try and make sure we ask that question. We will shift to Q&A in about 10 or 15 minutes, so also feel free to hold that question for that moment. Sylvia, do you want to talk about digital citizenship at all?
Well, I think, it all ties in together. I don't think, if you just even look at the word citizenship, it means being a member of community. It means there's a two-way street. You get something, you give something. If digital citizenship is just about teaching kids rules, that's not citizenship. That's like a digital dictatorship. We're just, sort of we're downloading stuff to kids. Being a citizen means stepping up and taking responsibility. So what are you going to give kids responsibility for? If they're not able to use the technology, how are they going to become responsible? This is, Nancy Willard, whose work I respect highly, says it's like teaching kids to swim without a swimming pool. We've all heard the saying, if we taught baseball like we taught, things in school, by the 12th grade you would have read all the rules and had quizzes on all the the batting positions and the outfield, and would have never stepped onto a baseball diamond. So we have to figure out how to keep the kids safe, but we can't just say that we're teaching digital citizenship to kids. It just doesn't make any sense at all to me. And like Sandy says here, Sandy is allowing personal devices to use in the classroom. This is coming. It's not like we have a decision about this. Sandy and other people are well aware that 5 years from now, we can't even have this conversation. We can't say we'll never be able to stop this from happening. We cannot shut the doors of the classroom to the technology devices and the connectivity that's coming. we're putting our heads in the sand if we think this is going to just go away.
Sorry, my audio got delayed there a bit, and I didn't mean to interrupt you earlier. Hey, I don't want to go too far afield, but there was a question I wanted to ask you tonight before we got to the Q&A. I think you and I have talked before about, a concern that there's a little bit of a gender divide when it comes to conference speaking and representing the community. Do you have any thoughts about that tonight that might lead us to a productive discussion?
Gosh, there's so many things to talk about. You did really take a big left turn there, didn't you, Steve? I think there's the gender divide as well as between the classroom and school administrators. The higher up you go in school leadership, the fewer women you see, even though, the teaching staff is overwhelmingly female. I think there are some kind of practical, logistical, familial issues that make it more riskier for a woman going out on the road. Women tend to be the primary caretakers, things like that. If you're trying to speak at conferences, it means you're leaving something behind. And while gender roles have definitely changed in the last 30 years, the woman's still the primary caretaker. There's a whole, body of work that say that people don't take things women say as seriously as the things that men say. There's probably another master's thesis in there somewhere. On the other hand, I think there are an incredible number of strong women who are making a difference, are out there speaking in their own communities, out, in conferences. I think we have to encourage it. I think we have to tell women that their voices are wanted and needed, maybe more explicitly than men. Jeff, you brought up a whole other one. You go to conferences and it's very white. What's keeping people, women of color, men of color, from coming to educational technology conferences? I don't know.
I'm interested if the audience has any thoughts on this as well. And I think it came up for you and me in the context of who gets asked to keynote, and sort of the conversation went from there. Let's ask the community here. Are there things that we could be doing that would make a difference here, or to help promote voices that for some reason aren't necessarily getting the attention that they could? Feel free to put something in the chat, or if you're feeling really strongly, you can raise your hand. Sylvia, are there any other sort of hot button issues for you right now? What things are you really thinking about actively?
Oh gosh, well, the whole waiting for Superman is on the top of everybody's mind. We probably already talked about that. You never want to feel like there's nothing that you can do and nothing that can be changed. I think people just want to keep working the way we are. I think the other thing that I always think about is, because of my engineering background, I think about programming and how important learning programming was for me, as it really propelled me forward in my academic life and my understanding of the world and my grasp of everything, math and science and just the way the world works. And there's a number of things where engineering and programming are trying to sneak their way into the curriculum, and I'm constantly looking at those efforts and trying to figure out where I can help.
So I'm trying to remember the first name of I've interviewed him. His last name is Rushkoff. What's his first name? And I think he's just written a book about the importance of learning programming. Douglas Rushkoff, yeah. Has anybody seen anything about that or done anything about it, Sylvia?
I haven't read his book. I just, for me, it was just a real intellectual experience, a really powerful experience that, I really hadn't had before, something that I really grasped. Somebody said, how was I introduced to programming? I actually went to a National Science Foundation funded summer program where kids had to apply, and it was, I think, when I was between 11th and 12th grade, and the computers were, behind big walls, and we had to learn punch cards and everything. And we went to live on a college campus for 6 weeks, and I was the first one in my family who really went to college, and it was a very really, really interesting experience. And the programming part was the part that just took off for me. And, plus other things, realizing that the way that the high school classes were not the way they taught them in college. I mean, there wasn't this math, science, history. I mean, there were like 20,000 different kinds of math and 20,000 different kinds of physics, and there was, theoretical and applied, and it was such an eye-opener. And that sort of stuck with me, and just being able to have so many choices I thought was really amazing. And, I think the NSF does some really good work in opening up opportunities for kids to see that there's, a whole range of possibilities for college and careers.
Good. Well, let's kind of ease ourselves into a Q&A here with Sylvia. You've probably asked some questions in the chat that I haven't seen. So if you did ask a question in the chat and I missed it, please feel free to post it again. You can also use the larger hand with the green up arrow. That's the icon at the bottom of your participant window to raise your hand, and we'll give you the microphone to let you ask Sylvia a question out loud. If you haven't used the mic before in Elluminate, do go up to Tools, Audio, and run the Audio Setup Wizard. So there's a discussion about Scratch taking place in the chat, Sylvia. Are you Scratch familiar?
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Not an expert, but definitely familiar.
Would you be willing to give a short description? Go ahead.
Scratch is a programming language for kids. It's a graphic and fairly easy to learn. MIT has developed it, and there are amazing resources online. I mean, one of the things that people just sort of freak out about is that programming is just something I can't possibly do. But Scratch is easy to learn and easy to teach too, and there are amazing teaching resources on the Scratch Educator website, videos, downloadable things you can, like somebody mentioned, the cards, things you can have the kids cut up, and little activities, and just it's one of these things that you can't let teachers wait until they feel comfortable to do something. They have to be given permission to jump into something where they're not comfortable, and that's a big, big change in kind of professional development as we know it.
Sylvia, we have a question. It's from Deb, and she's asking, what do you see as steps teachers can take at the grassroots level? So I'm assuming that means if your school is not actually implementing a program for student involvement in this way, are there things that a teacher can do?
Well, I think you do what you have control of. If you're a teacher in the classroom, think about, are there things that you're trying to do with technology where you may be the unintentional roadblock, and can you hand some of that responsibility over to kids? Why not let them have a discussion of which tool is the appropriate one for the job? The conversation around choosing the tool is just as important as using the tool. One of the ISTE-NET standards is choosing the appropriate tool. If you're a teacher in teacher professional development, RJ and YES programs can be, clubs, classes. They're very different school to school. But I featured on my blog a week or so ago someone from Australia who had what they called Catch a Teacher Day. So they had a committee of students and teachers who were into technology, and they decided to have sort of a fair day, a tech fair, where they would ask the teachers to come in. But what the teachers did instead was the teachers would bring groups of kids, leave the kids, and go away. And so the students who were on this committee decided they would call it Catch a Teacher Day, and they would try and catch the teachers as they were leaving the room and convince them to stay and learn this technology. So, that wasn't hard. It didn't take a lot of time, but it gave the kids responsibility and ownership over this. They saw the issue of the teachers trying to leave and just leave the kids, to learn themselves. That's a simple thing you can do. You can set up a student tech crew. You can do, have kids do community service. I had one teacher tell me that he got a box of computer carts delivered right before the winter break, and his kids said, well, can they help? So the kids came in on winter break and helped him build these, roll-around carts and put old refurbished computers on them that had like projectors and the sound, they tested the sound cables and made them little projector stations, little, movable projector stations, and then those kids were allowed to go to the principal's office and check them out. Really simple. And the kids did extra stuff. The kids named them. They decorated the carts. Sometimes giving kids ownership of things is really that simple.
I think we've talked before also about having the students do a form of teaching to the parents or other members of the community around schools. Are you seeing examples of that?
Some schools do it formally. Some schools actually have workshops where, it's Photoshop night, it's download your email night, it's, and the kids actually prepare workshops for anyone in the community who wants to come into the school. Some of this is more informal. What do we want our kids to say when they go home? After, say a couple years after the parents have voted for the technology bond, and the kid comes home and the parent says, what'd you do in school today? And the kid never mentions technology or says, oh yeah, we bought, the laptops they brought are stupid and they never work and none of the teachers use them. Well, how does the parent feel? They got duped into thinking that their money was going to this high-tech 21st century learning. Instead, wouldn't it be better to share with the kids what your vision of education technology is? So when they go home, they can talk to their parents about what kind of technology they're using. The parents can see that my student is involved with teaching teachers technology or doing tech support or, something that they can be proud of, that the parents can understand. I think this messaging is really important. I think a lot of times we don't think about what message is going home, and it's mostly going home through the kids.
Interesting. I'm going back to your statement about sort of the inevitability of the handheld device, and almost the degree to which, like the calculator, we can say it will come into the classroom. It's such a powerful learning tool, and maybe that also sort of overcomes the traditional barriers to the use of computers. If you're looking at schools that are doing the one-to-one, for those schools that aren't doing one-to-one, have you seen creative uses of computers in situations where they have very little funds to purchase the computers?
Oh, absolutely. You don't need. There's no like shopping list of, oh, this is the perfect setup. And I think sometimes people do get sort of wrapped up in waiting for the next iteration. If I just had enough bandwidth, if I just had the right computer, if I just had, And I remember somebody just put in the chat, we were working ClarisWorks and LC2s. It was like, if we just had color, if we just had a laser printer, you'll never get there. We've got schools where the technology is upgraded because the kids did something with the existing technology. So, we ask teachers to do their lessons to use the existing technology. We'll teach the kids to use that technology, to have them teach the teachers. If people see that you're using what you have, then they'll be more willing to give you more. If they're seeing the kids lead and come home and say, I'm in charge of the computer lab, and I'm rewiring the building, and I'm setting up the wireless network, that's something that the parents can understand. And that results in more community support of more technology. So I definitely don't think it's a we have to wait for the right technology kind of thing.
I also wanted to go back to your comment about the community of practice in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And are you seeing the teachers who do that, are there sort of natural steps to expanding that beyond technology?
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the secrets is that technology enables a more open-ended, student-centered approach, a pedagogy. And a lot of times when you try and teach technology without teaching new approaches to pedagogy, that teachers can't bridge that divide. They can't just do the same old things in new ways. It just doesn't make sense. There's so many things that can change, and it becomes apparent. And I think a lot of people here kind of caught that spark. A lot of teachers tell me that they haven't felt this enthused since they were in grad school or they were new teachers, that technology really makes them feel like, this is the reason they got into teaching, because it empowers students, it excites students, it makes everything possible. But you can't just be a lecturer and really make use of technology. So I think those things go hand in hand.
So if you have a question for Sylvia, please feel free to put it in the chat, or use the icon with the hand and the green up arrow, the larger icon at the bottom of the participant window, to raise your hand.
Can I answer the Ohio question? Ed Jones
Please.
Ohio question, do you give credit for extra activities? What about other states? There's a lot of interesting things happening in states. One is that community service credit is becoming more common, and that's law in a number of states. So, kids can do tech support as community service just as well as picking up trash or cleaning up the beach or whatever. New Hampshire has a new law that it's something like mandatory electives or mandatory choice, or it's some weird juxtaposition of things. I don't know if anyone's here from New Hampshire, but they're really opening up the idea that everyone taking the same cookie cutter schedule is just not working. So I think there's a lot of states that are kind of bucking the trend and trying to get away from this one-size-fits-all, set of courses that would allow for community service, for internships, for schools who want to do those kinds of things. Like the Big Picture Schools is a group of schools that focuses very heavily on internships. Now, they're not like a high-tech high, or they don't focus on technology, but it turns out that a lot of stuff they do is very high-tech because that's the real world.
Sylvia, are there voices that you follow that you'd want to give a shout out for, or people maybe that our audience wouldn't know that you feel are saying things of importance?
Oh gosh, I think you had the list up and you're interviewing them all. That's an amazing list you've got there. There are people who are doing things at all levels. I follow classroom teachers. Some of you are here too. That I get excited about reading what you're doing in your classroom. And there are people who are more well known, like Deborah Meyer and Diane Ravitch, who I follow. I think their blog is fabulous. I can't imagine a better example of public discourse than what Deborah Meyer and Diane Ravitch are doing in writing, in public, every day. Important issues, respectful language. It's an amazing. They're an amazing pair. Kieran Egan, who's on your list, is probably, I don't know if everyone knows him, but a really, really interesting guy. He completely opened my mind about the power of narrative, not just in language arts or history, but in every subject. And he has some really, really unique views. I'm really looking forward to that interview. It's in December 7th. And if you can pick up some of his books, it's really, really interesting what the things that he talks about. Roger Schenck, he's one of a kind. Seriously, you have to listen to this guy. I think he's incredibly brilliant. He's been talking about simulations and alternative kinds of curriculum for years. He's tried to start schools. He's done all sorts of interesting things where, the curriculum is essentially 2 or 3 sentences, and the entire year's learning comes off of those big ideas, and really, really good stuff. So I think you've got an amazing list here, Steve.
I'm laughing because the only reason I came across Kieran Megan was he wrote a book called The Future of Education, and somehow that popped up for me, and I was like, oh my gosh, how did I not know about him?
Mm-hmm.
So we did an exercise the other night when we were doing our Elevating the Dialogue show, and we asked our guests if they were writing an education manifesto or education declaration, what would be at the top of that list? What would be at the top of your list?
Oh gosh, if I was clever, I'd make this alliterative or something. But local control. Well, local community school control.
Have you seen local communities do that well? And is there a good model? Has somebody developed, or are people documenting good models for that kind of community involvement?
I think they are. They just don't get a lot of publicity. I think the publicity machine that's grinding out in the press today, in the movies and on TV, is just massive. And I the other day, NBC Nightly News called us. Called me on the phone. It's like, you're kidding, really? It's like getting a call from the president or something. And they said, well, maybe we'll do a piece on one of your schools, and I gave them some, principals' names, and, let's say they do one amazing story that lasts for 2 minutes on the news for one night, and then that story goes away, and everyone goes, yay, that was great, but then it's gone. And there are stories like that all over the country, and very few of them rise to even get like 2 minutes on a national news show, and I don't know how to change that imbalance. I don't know how to, figure out how to elevate these stories other than us telling them over and over and over again, and not just telling them, but telling people what's remarkable about them. Sometimes we tell our stories in a way that seems obvious to us that this is remarkable and amazing, but to other people it looks just sort of like, the kids are playing around, or yeah, the kids had a good time that day. But I think we need to really always think of the audience who's outside our circle of influence. Creating, like Lucy said, success stories that a parent would understand, your next door neighbor would understand. Because when I talk to parents and next door neighbors, they're not about test scores. They don't care about AYP. They tell me things like, I never learned in school, all the tests and stupid things. I only learned by hands-on. And it's like, okay, well, let's get that spirit together. It's very confusing, the times and the different attitudes towards school that this country has.
So something of a selfish
stories.
Well, agreed. So something of a selfish motive for asking the question, because I got off a call this afternoon with Edutopia and Redo, and the idea was, could we create a series of local events that somehow helped people in a community begin that discussion about how to build that education for their community. And I interviewed Tony Wagner from Harvard, and I know he did this, where he would go to a community and they'd gather the constituents together and they'd sort of build their community education plan from scratch. But I'm wondering if there's anybody who's actually I haven't been able to find a documentation, sort of the steps that they took to actually do that. Who did they bring together? How did they schedule their days? Mm-hmm. That's what I'm sort of looking for.
I don't know anything specific. I mean, I've heard of like community events where communities get together, like future search kinds of things you're thinking about?
Exactly, like a future.
Yeah.
I love the future search model.
Yeah. Well, you know Bernadine Porter, right?
Not well. I do not know her well.
Well, she's a certified future search organizer leader, and she's done that work with schools, but I don't think much recently. I think that sort of community, mission has kind of gone away. I think people feel less connected to their schools, less connected to their community. The local newspapers are going away, local radio and television shows are going away. It's much tougher to bring a community out around something. But those kinds of models exist. Future search. If you Google future search, it's a way for communities to come together and make long-term plans and action plans in a short period of time that are really well thought out and actionable. And there are people who are trained as future search leaders.
I think what I really like about future search is that, if I'm not mistaken, there's an exercise at the beginning that's really designed to help people not feel separated from each other. I think they write their stories up on the wall of sort of their histories, and it's a way of kind of breaking away from dialogue that's divisive and moving very much toward sort of a more community-oriented feel. I'm going to have to go look it up, but again, very interested. And if anybody else is, please feel free to email me. And this is an effort that I think there may actually be some steam to. Okay, we've only got a couple.
They also focus a lot about getting people in the room. They won't start the meeting until everyone's there, because we get a lot of that. It's like, well, this committee is going to decide something, but they don't actually have any responsibility or power to do it. I also want to give a shout out to Thomas Lasig, who just came in. He was the teacher who did the Catch a Teacher Day. So, Thomas, I was talking about you before. And if people look on my blog and search for Catch a Teacher Day, you'll find a whole write-up about that event and what a great idea it was. Aw, shucks, guys.
So David has a question, and David, I gave you the microphone. I don't know if looks like you lowered your hand, but if you'd like to take the mic, you can. If anybody else has a question, we probably have time for one question left for Sylvia. Sylvia, any sort of final thoughts?
No, I just really appreciate so many people coming out. I'm happy to talk to people about, Gen Yes or student technology leaders, project-based technology literacy. I mean, we do a lot of things that I didn't even talk about, but, these issues are really important, and I think, we have to get together. I know people say we're always preaching to the choir, but, the choir is the heart of the church. If we don't support each other and tell each other we're doing a good job, it's all going to go away. So I think we need a lot of encouragement these days. We can, do amazing things, share those successes out, talk to new teachers, bring people into the fold, and explain how important this all is. So really thank you guys all for coming out, and talk to you all around.
Oh, well, hang on, because David has turned his mic on. David, did you want to ask a quick question?
Thanks, Steve. Hi, Sylvia. I posted in the chat, and I'll do it again. There's this interesting art exhibit that apparently is going to start next year with a specially designed truck, and it will spend 5 weeks in 8 different areas in a center city and an outlying area at a military base. And it just struck me that some of what we were talking about, the education tour would be something interesting to try to do, taking in a lot of the ideas that were mentioned in the last 15 minutes.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I made a note of that. Appreciate your comment, and you're bringing that up. Okay, so Sylvia, I'm going to clap for you. Just really delightful to spend time with you, as always. Thanks for coming on, for bringing your unique perspective. You said some things that I will not soon forget, and I really appreciate it. Thanks to Elluminate Blackboard now. Thanks to Bing, Microsoft's Redo program for some support this month. Coming up tomorrow, Roger Shank, and then on Thursday, Kathleen Cushman. So hopefully there's something on that list that is worthwhile. We really appreciate your attending tonight. And again, Sylvia, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thank you to everyone who showed up. Really appreciate it. You guys are great.
The Sylvia Martinez fan club is now dismissed.
Oh man, Steve, you're great. You're a great interviewer. It's so much fun to talk to you.
Thank you. That was really fun. Okay, so we'll go ahead and finish up there. We won't stick around tonight because I am down at the EduCause conference, but we'll turn the recording off, and then we do need you to leave the room so the recording can process, and that will go up later tonight. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night or day, depending on where you are.